Hello, lovely people, and welcome. Alicia Yusuf here, and I'm back with a video all about grief. Why am I talking about grief? Jupiter is moving back into Pisces tomorrow, and from the 28th of October through until the 21st of December this year, we're going to go back into the deep oceanic currents of where Jupiter in Pisces took us earlier this year. And for many, I know astrologers, we were talking about the imagination and the magic and the creativity of Jupiter and Pisces, and that was absolutely there. However, I have seen a lot of clients who have been also delving into or being feeling washed around in the tides and the currents of grief. There has been a lot of loss in the world, and grief can be around many things. I mean, we acknowledge grief around a death, a bereavement, and we also acknowledge grief around losing someone we love. And I think there's also that sense right now that we're feeling grief around losing a life, losing a normality, losing the hopes and the dreams of what we believed pre 2020. And grief can take so many forms, and it's not just a single thing. Grief isn't an emotion of its own. It's a mix of many things, including loss and longing. And so I wanted to invite on a really wonderful mentor of mine, Kimberly Ross, who's in New Zealand. And she has been researching human behavior and grief for many decades and has a very personal story around grief too. I myself faced the loss of my father this year. So Jupiter in Pisces was definitely around that for me. And I guess Kimberly and I wanted to talk about how to think about grief and take it into the higher realms and help us all step into the process of grief in a way that is more compassionate and more understanding and revealing the individuality of the grief process. I think one thing I really noted this year that made me want to speak about this was a number of times in which people were judging other people for how their grief played out. So, for example, around Queen Elizabeth and her death. And I actually saw grief on two sides here: the grief of the people who saw her as a leader, who saw her as almost like a grandmother or a matriarchal figure, who were grieving the loss of that in their lives. And then there was the grief of people who saw her as the head of a country and a system that has created great pain and loss in their own lives, through colonialism and through what has happened from there. So I think that, grief can come in a number of ways, and the more that we understand it, the better we can deal with it. So I wanted to introduce Kimberly. And Kimberly, do you want to speak a bit about yourself and your own knowledge and experience with grief?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me on. It's really great to be able to come on and talk about a subject like this, which is often, some of it's really easy to see and a lot of it's really quite hidden and still being discovered. So the more that we can have a dialogue about it, I think is really useful for people. I've actually been interested in this whole domain of grief, loss, the way humans react to each other in times of loss, sadness, overwhelming sadness, all my life, really.
Mm.
6 years ago, my youngest daughter was diagnosed with terminal cancer, a very rare form of cancer. And I found myself leaning into all the research I had done over very, very many years. And it really gave me a stability to kind of brace myself. Not that I didn't feel all the wash of sadness and, acute sensations that go with losing someone who's very, very dear to you. But the subsequent waves of that followed and how I could think about it, handle it. And it really has driven me to want to speak about it with more people more often,
Mm.
under the carpet. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, for me, I have had grief in my life and I speak about it, in my job as a counselor. But this year, with losing my father, it's the first time it's been up close and very personal. And those waves of grief that you just mentioned, you know, that's a big part of the process of it, isn't it? That sense that it's very acute and very front and center in the beginning, and then it kind of ebbs away a bit, and then suddenly an anniversary will come up or a memory will come up or something, and then it's there front and center again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How did
Yeah,
you
and
navigate those waves?
how do you navigate those waves? Well, I think first of all, fundamentally, is to understand or have some kind of touchstone about what grief is itself.
Mm,
Because I think we can really mix up a whole range of emotions. We can mix up sadness with loss, with things we haven't forgiven ourselves um, for maybe not saying the things we wanted to say to people that have passed, right through to some of those really huge issues that you've spoken about. It could be a loss of a pregnancy. It could be a loss of a favorite building. I mean, I can give you an example of that one in Christchurch in New Zealand when we had the earthquakes. During the very intense period of those earthquakes, people were turning up into the hospital with what they were deeming as broken heart syndrome, because people were losing all the stabilities around them of the things that they loved, like buildings. People were coming in broken-hearted that something like a cathedral was damaged. And it's actually a real thing. They felt like they were having a heart attack, but they were diagnosed with broken heart syndrome, which comes right. So it's like, is that grief? Is that sadness? What actually is that? So that would be my first point, is to kind of have a touchstone about what grief is. First of all, it's not linear. It's not like you can go, well, there's step 1 to grief, and then step 2, and then step 3. And, oh, why aren't you through step 3 now? I should be at step 4. You bounce around all over the place in these waves that you were talking about. So the first thing is that grief is a process, and it's a process of retention and return. Retention and return. And that's got a lot to do with investment. The more you invest emotionally in something, the more you long for something, want something, tell yourself that something's going to happen a certain way, you're investing yourself into it. And then when that doesn't come to pass, you feel like an ache or an emptiness or a sadness or a longing that things didn't necessarily match up to your expectation. And also, when people are with each other a lot, so, you know, you live in a house or you were brought up in a family with a dad that you just absolutely loved, and every time he said, I love you, Alicia, a little bit of that arrives in you.
yeah.
Turns up in you, and you feel it. We all know these feelings, we feel them. And we go through our lives having these exchanges with people, some to a very small degree, and some on a really emotionally invested degree. And so when that person passes or that thing leaves us, they need everything that they've put in you back. And you feel this thing getting ripped out of you because they need it for their next bit of their journey. So it returns to them. So even if you didn't like them, but you had a huge investment, it's got to come back to them. So it's knowing that the feeling, that visceral, really in your muscles and your bones ache, that ripping out of you feeling happens, is because that person really needs it now. So just being able to say something like that to yourself, this is happening because, and I love them so much and they need it back from me.
Yeah.
At the same time, everything that you've put into them comes back to you. So you have these weird feelings of real loss and then real joy and memory. So that's the place I would start with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that the Irish have those wakes. It's almost that kind of celebration, and there's sadness and there's mourning as a part of it, but there's also the celebration of that, you know, that things are returning, that you're feeling that love that they held for you returning back to you.
Exactly. It's a celebration of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we think even about, for example, divorce, that can be a complex experience in and of itself as well, because there is the hopes and the dreams that you had for that relationship and where it might end up and where it could take you. And then suddenly, people are changing and, separation is needed. The return of those hopes and dreams comes to you too, would you believe? Or
I think what you did and what you worked for, investment comes back to you.
yeah.
If you put your heart and soul into anything, then there's a genuineness in that. All the care that you put into building a home or a house with someone else, then that says that you're a person, and care comes back to you.
Yeah.
But mostly because marriage is filled with such high expectations in the world.
Yeah,
When
these
it
days,
oh,
especially.
we're navigating all those things of not only loss and certain degrees of dysfunction and uncomfortability and blame and regret, a whole host of emotions that, and we do grieve the loss of the thing we hoped for,
Yeah.
because people picture themselves with someone, I get married and it's going to work and I'm going to stay with this person my whole life. And we even have pictures and images forming up of sitting on, lovely decks, rocking together in a rocking chair when we get older. And when that doesn't work, that investment of even your thoughts is the pain that you feel coming back to you. It's the
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's important as well to realize that this can also be around many other things like the building that you discussed. And I think it's around lifestyle. And even right now, I'm working with people who are feeling a lot of grief around the planet. They're calling it climate grief or, eco grief, this sense that, what's going to happen. And what I always thought was safe and stable, is it going to be? So there's a grief of that connection to something
Yes.
that, yeah, are we causing pain? And it's a complex grief in that way, because it's like, well, am I causing the pain to this? And what does that look like? And for me, I have a total belief that the planet actually can look after itself. I do believe that the earth has the intelligence to know when enough is enough.
Yeah.
Doesn't stop us from needing to be more careful and honor our connection to the planet more. But yeah, I don't know. What would you say to that, eco grief or climate grief?
Well, I think those things are very, very real. And I don't
Mm,
think it's ever just one thing.
yeah.
Because if we look at the world today, and if we go down that path, it's, pretty horrible for people.
Yeah.
Whole structure of stability that has been there for a very long time
Mm,
is no longer there. And we're on these shifting sands. And people are looking outside of themselves to the things that they've always known and feeling that nothing is stable anymore. And there is a natural grief. We're humans on a planet, and we will naturally feel the pain that is happening on her. And we can look at it from politics to economics to the way relationships are breaking down, social media, the lack of humanity
yeah.
between. And it's like, even going back 20 years, it felt more stable. It was like
Mm,
there were things that were happening, but we had some sense of control.
yeah.
Now we don't. And it's overwhelming.
Mm,
Where do you look? What do you look to? So if you're looking outside of yourself for someone to fix it, it's not going to be fixed, or not immediately. It doesn't appear to be that it will be fixed immediately. So you have to go inwards. What are the stabilities in you? What are the things that are always going to be there for you as a person, as a life, and how you will behave, how you will treat other people, what you love, what you cherish, what you walk around with. So what builds your intactness on the inside?
mm,
Because things are shifting. Yeah.
yeah. Can
It's
you give
huge.
it is huge.
Yeah.
And yet I think it's also exciting in many ways, because we are on the edge of change. you know, and if we look back at where we've come from, you know, working in the education system the way I have, and now in the mental health system, those are just two areas that need a big shift. And I know that we're seeing it in our political systems, our financial systems, and our social systems too. But it is that, okay, how can I be on the edge of the unknown? How can I be in that place and feel a stability? And that intactness that you're talking about is a core part of that. Can you give an example of what that might look like?
How to stay intact in oneself?
Mm,
Well, I think the first thing is knowing what it is that you actually want.
mm,
It isn't the latest Gucci handbag, but is something of substance that you can fall back on. It's inside friends and family, if you can go to friends and family. It's joining people of like mind who feel the same way, not to polarize, but in companionship. So, I mean, you brought it up, longing, belonging.
yeah.
It's like figuring out what it is you belong to. And it's not on the outside, it's on the inside first. And it's curious because people who have the same values, if they go out and look for others of the same values as them, they'll find them.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of find each other. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not an astrology buff at all, but you brought up the words, you know, shifting tides and things feeling like they're coming in waves, and the nature of water in Pisces is fluid. It's a fluid thing. Water finds its own level wherever you put it. So it's like allowing yourself to be a little bit fluid.
Mm,
If you feel like you're really locked into the way something ought to be, that might not be such a good idea.
yeah.
If you allow yourself to actually kind of sit back and watch the water, go, where's it going now?
Yeah.
How do I need to be? Can I swim in this river? You know,
Mm,
rather than clinging onto the water banks of things the banks of everything I thought was happening when they seem to be crumbling.
yeah.
And yeah, with grief, I mean, that is, you've got to be so allowing of yourself with grief,
Absolutely.
because it's when you feel overwhelmed and you feel sad or lost or like you don't belong or fit anywhere, where do you go?
Mm,
Go inside yourself. It's almost like you've got to breathe and go, okay, this is happening to me now.
yeah.
Or have someone that can point out to you, because you can't always see where you are, you know, in your own journey. This is what's happening to me now. What does it look like? What does it feel like? How can I help myself? How can I help others?
Yeah.
How can I shift with where I'm going now? What new opportunities might be around the corner? I mean, when my daughter passed away, one of the things we made sure that we did was have everything we needed in place for her.
Mm,
And one of the questions I was asking was, have I done right by myself? And have I done right by her? In that, have I done everything I could possibly do? And I did. I did everything I could do, everything I could possibly think about. I read all the books, read all, you know, everything I could do, from staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning for 18 months straight researching, because was there any natural health things I could do, to bringing her into my home and taking care of her, to changing all our diets, to making sure that she had every person that she'd ever loved in her life she'd had a chance to speak to.
yeah.
To making sure she had a will, to making sure that there was nothing that we could see that was actually undone or untidy.
Mm,
And it was really curious, because I think it was like 3 years down the track, I'm driving down the road and a song came on the radio, and she got married 15 days before she passed away. This
mm,
lovely kind of gorgeous man that came into her life and kind of picked her up at the end there. And we had sent out her wedding invitations on social media, and we had put a Bruno Mars, I Think I Want to Marry You song. You know, I think I want to marry you. We put
yeah.
that into the online invite. And I'm driving down the road 3 years later, the song comes on the radio. And all of a sudden, I'm right back where I was.
Mm.
Passed away. And I'm crying. I'm driving along and I'm crying. And then something in me went, hang on a minute. You weren't sad 5 minutes ago. Why are you crying? Why are you crying? I could almost see her laughing at me, going, oh, for goodness, come on, woman. And I realized that was an old emotion.
Mm.
It's kind of like having some sort of awareness that not everything you're feeling is yours.
Yeah.
Not every sadness is grief. And it's kind of like just breathing and just laughing at myself at that point. Because 3 years before that, if I had heard it, it would have really triggered me. But this was just like, when people put on sad songs when they're feeling sad and it makes them more sad.
Yeah.
Do that to yourself. So it's kind of like put on a happy song and remember what she was like and celebrate and love. And if it's a dog or a cat or a miscarriage, or to give oneself, okay, that really did happen to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to minimize it, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't, and I'm not going to put on a brave face. But I'm also going to recognize that we're on a journey and everything moves.
Yeah.
That's part of that.
Yeah. And I think you brought up some really, you alluded to this a number of times, is that feeling of loss and longing, and that idea of belonging, longing to be. And, grief has been a communal process for a very long time. The ancients talked about it. And I remember in my grief earlier this year, unless I was with the people that were connected to my father, I felt bubbled, and sometimes it was a magical bubble that was mystical and kept me away from the rough edges of the world around. And I appreciated it then. And other times it was a bubble that felt hard and scaly, and it was too much, and so it was in those times that I learned to reach out to those people who understood, like yourself reached out to you, or reached out to my mum, and my brother and my husband too. And it was a really important part of moving through the grief, of not expecting to have to do it alone, and not expecting to not do it, or do it to a timeline either. I know that we've talked about this, we're not we, you and I, but in society there has been that stages of grief, or these things that you move through. And even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, I never meant it to be a process, but our logical, rational, scientific society took it that way. And I think it's that allowance that we give ourselves to just allow those tides to come in and out, or those waves to come in and out, but not surrender to it, but reach.
Because I think also society wants us to move through things, over things, and we're actually frightened of our own grief, frightened of our own pain, because it's really painful. It hurts. And we are brought up where we fix anything that hurts. We've got to fix it. We've got to sort it. Here's a painkiller. Here's this, here's that. But actually, no, if you can breathe into it and stay with it and recognize that, especially when you loved someone more than almost your life itself, is how it feels at times. It's going to hurt. And so to be gentle with oneself about that, it's going to hurt. Hello, we have a visitor.
That's all right. We love cats here, so no, totally welcome.
He doesn't normally do this, so there you go. That says something.
Interesting.
So I can't quite remember what I was saying, but we rush ourselves through things, which is why that whole linear, I should be feeling at the anger stage now, or I should be feeling, but it's like, it can turn up in 20 years.
Absolutely.
Turn up like a little, capsule bursting open. There's something, a memory will get stirred that you didn't visit before. Or all of a sudden you're wiser and you will recognize something. And then all of a sudden you're able to let something go, maybe that you've been holding on to. So it's appearance is completely shifting. And the
Mm.
longer it goes by, you start to recognize I've moved from that real visceral grief to
Mm-hmm.
a longing, to a sadness. Now I'm back to feeling something visceral again. Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
And over time, you do get distance and you can stand back and be more measured.
Yeah.
Don't judge yourself, others. And, you know, there's books about this now, and quite irreverent things you can find, where the 10 things you don't say to someone who's grieving.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
things like, you know, don't patronize people.
Or don't offer platitudes.
That's right. They are
Time will heal all wounds.
that's right. They're going through what they're going through.
Yeah.
And it's so unique to each person.
Yeah.
And yes, it is a definite process. It has a function inside human life so that people get what they need back from others because they need it. But it's unique. No one else will ever understand or feel the way you do. And it's important to recognize that, you know.
Yeah.
Not expect that a person should be at a certain stage. I remember, God bless my mum, who passed away a year or so ago now. She had a best friend who they were friends for like 50 years. And she's my quasi auntie. She wasn't a real auntie, but we called her auntie. And when her husband died, for a very long time, she would walk into the house. And every time she walked into the house, she'd say, "Hello, Terry, I'm home now." And she would tell him about her day, but he wasn't there. But it was part of her pattern.
Yeah.
She had years walked in the door, said hello to him, told her about his day. They'd had an exchange.
Yeah.
And that pattern stabilized her life.
Yeah.
Stabilized her. She had an anchor point and a way of navigating through this incredible sadness that she had. And I remember my mum walking in and going, "What is wrong with Auntie? She still keeps talking to him, but he's gone. He's not there." And I was like, "Mum, that's her. That's how she's coping with this." And my mum just couldn't wrap her head around it. But there was friction between them for a while because Mum wanted her to move on.
Yeah.
My mother's belief system clashed.
Yeah.
She had a different set of values around dying and what happens afterwards and all of that. So it's recognizing that it's like you've got to know what another person wants, what another person needs from you.
Yeah.
You can ask people, "What do you need from me?
Yeah.
You know, where would you like me to be with you in this?
Absolutely.
I don't know what you're feeling right now. I've got some idea, but I'll be here if you need me. I'll keep checking in with you once a day, once a month, once a week, whatever you want."
Yeah.
You know, kind of like not expecting anything. And just allowing, you know, it's soft.
Yeah.
Soft. And it's not found in the medical profession. You know, they have, if they're lucky, between 2 to 4 hours of training in their entire medical careers, depending on what country they're in. You know, so that they're not equipped to handle it. And they see it all the time, every day. And it hardens them to it.
Yeah.
And yet there is a naturalness, like you know, brought up Kubler Ross, you know, being at home, all of those natural things, to see the ebb and flow of life as something that's moving and shifting all the time. So it's nothing is static here. Nothing. Everything comes, goes, relationships come and go, jobs come and go, people come and go, plants come and go. So allowing us to be with those natural things, you know, the leaves don't stay on the tree all year in an, you know, deciduous tree. Things are moving, things are going through cycles. You know, we go through air, water, fire, you know, we go through a whole range of things. We're allowed to feel volatile 1 minute.
Yeah. And not think that we're crazy.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the things that people really label themselves. And I'll never forget, you know, I lost my grandmother. My first grandmother passed well, my first grandmother to pass was when I was 21. And at that stage in my life, I had a lot going on, including quite a toxic relationship in my life. So when she died, I felt grief, but I didn't really feel it. And I didn't really allow myself. And about 3 years later, I went to the funeral of a work colleague's father. So someone that, I was there to support my work colleague. It was someone I was totally detached to. Walked into the chapel, and it was in the same complex as my grandmother's service as well. And the service started, and I was sobbing uncontrollably because I hadn't allowed myself and my family, the dynamics of my father's family were not ones to really deal with it at the point. It was like, okay, we'll do what we do, done, dusted. And I had to leave. I had to leave the service because it was actually taking over. And it was then that I really, my friend who I was with was beautiful and really supported me. And, the colleague was amazing as well. So there was no judgment, and people understood. And that's how grief works, and in a way, my colleague at the time, he reflected, it actually encouraged other people to see that it was all right to feel sad. It gave them permission, what happened with me, to do it.
Right.
But there is that sense that if we don't deal with grief, if we shut the lid on it, push it under, it will pop up. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, like it will pop up at another stage. And sometimes that can happen too. Sometimes you can be going through a process of loss in which your reaction feels like it's not matching what your investment is, as you put so beautifully. And that's complex grief. That's grief where this might be reminding you of memories of loss or grief that you've dealt with before, that or been with before, that you haven't dealt with, you haven't allowed, you haven't had that soft, gentle process with, being in the tides back and forth. So it's also not judging yourself in those points and saying, okay, well, this is an opportunity for me to feel both levels of grief, grief for this, grief for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think taking oneself to a place where you can just kind of softly go, what's happening?
Yeah.
And why am I feeling this? And is there something that has triggered this that I might need to kind of sit with gently?
Yeah.
And tell myself, well, that's okay, because I was only 5 or 10 or 20. And I didn't know what I know now. And so I can now take that person by the hand and bring them up to date with where I am today and go, well, this is how I view the world now.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't overwhelm you. Those sensations don't take you back to places that you don't necessarily need to go because you've moved on yourself.
Yeah.
So, and I think this complex grief is really only now being opened up in the world. I mean, really, some of the biggest things that are happening now are things that the grief that is rushing through hundreds of thousands of people who've been adopted. The actual grief of not actually knowing their parents or being given away at birth has really affected the psychology of people. And it's like, there, you'll be okay, or didn't you grow up in a good home, but that feeling, that innate feeling of one's DNA, one's lineage, where did I really come from? They're really unsettling for people.
Yeah.
You put on top of that all the other things that they might have lost or missed out on in their life. So this whole feeling of, I was here for a reason, and somehow things aren't matching up to that real deep feeling I feel on the inside of humans being purposeful or life being lived to the fullest. I've got these potholes I keep falling into. And can I get myself out of the pothole? How do I get myself out of the pothole without massive drama?
Yeah.
So it is complex. You're right, it's complex, and there isn't a one size fits all way through it.
There is not. And I think that's, I'm aware of time, and I think that's where it's so important that people get that message that grief is 100% individual as your fingerprint, and the process that you go through around it will be different. Even people who are sharing that same grief with you is very different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kimberly, there's one tool that you gave me when I reminded me of when I was going through, the grief around my father earlier this year, about I'd like you to just open it up a bit more before we finish. Do you remember about how to think about my father?
I can't quite remember what I said to you, but it was to do with holding the best of him in yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and that's why we have memorials.
Mm.
And why we need to have photographs of people around us who we've lost, or something that triggers something about them, is so that we hold the best of them.
Yeah.
And when we're feeling like we're moving away into times of absolute, despair or loss or
anguish,
anguish, regret,
Yeah.
these emotions are huge, is that we try and pull up the very, very best of that person.
Yeah.
What were their qualities? What were their values? They love. What did they cherish? What is it about them that makes the loss so difficult?
Yeah.
Whether it's they like to fish, or they liked to go on hikes, and what did they feel when they went on hikes? Because if you take yourself to the best of them,
Yeah.
you take yourself to the best of you.
Yeah.
You move yourself away from awful sadness into joy, and what a life that life lived, and here's what they taught me, and I'm holding that for them.
Yeah. Straight after that conversation, I went, Dad loved the ocean, and he introduced me, passed that passion to me. So I went and paddled out, on my surfboard with a bouquet of flowers, trying to stick it in my wetsuit, and getting out the back. And I could feel him. I could feel his spirit around me as I was just sitting out the back, and, just let that bouquet float away. And it was such an important part of that, holding his love of the ocean and his love of the natural environment. And yeah. And I know for my brother, it was one thing, and for my mother, it was another. But for all of us, it really helped us. And look, I get that there will be complex, if you have a relationship with someone where it has been more complex or harder, this may be a harder process to do. And so don't feel pressured that you have to. If you
Not every experience is a pleasant one.
No.
But it always comes back to, what about it is in it for me?
Yeah.
That I can move on from, because even in the trickiest relationships, there will be something. Even if it's someone teaching you what you don't want.
Yes, absolutely.
Be grateful for the lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
But if you can hold the best in another, it will take you to a place of settlement, ease. And sometimes it is working out how to get there. Some people write. I used to write and write and write.
Yes.
And
I recommend regularly.
Blog, and I wrote things out, and I found the gems that I wanted to hold on to, and turned them into stories. And the stories keep me going. And now I see a picture of my daughter, and I used to, for a very long time, I would just cry. I'd see her and I would cry. She was so beautiful and bright and talented, and she had so much going for her, and I couldn't believe all her losses. And now it's my other daughter's loss at not having her here while she goes through her life. So it's ongoing, shifting, moving. Okay, this is what we're navigating now.
Yeah.
And this is what we're navigating now,
And we're all navigating, I think, in the world too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kimberly. It was
You're so welcome.
Your gems.
We could talk about this forever, couldn't we?
I know, we absolutely could. And we may be. Let's see. All right. Take care. Thanks everyone for listening.
Okay. Bye.